When you're on the field, every second matters. And when covering the big game, there is no time to rest. A moment away is a moment lost.
There's no time to worry about pain. There's no time to think about, oh gosh, is there something actually wrong with me? I had no knowledge about blood clots. And he looked me dead in the face and he says, I have no idea how you're still alive.
Every 6 minutes, somebody in America dies of a blood clot.
We're here to change that statistic. Welcome to Taking a Breath, a Stop the Clot podcast.
A podcast dedicated to bringing awareness of the dangers of blood clots from the clotting disorders community to the world.
With the help of many notable blood clot survivors, we are here to give you the knowledge and the skills that you need to prevent this silent killer.
My name is Leslie Lake. I am the president of the National Blood Clot Alliance, and I am a blood clot survivor.
And my name is Todd Robertson. I am the patient engagement liaison for the National Blood Clot Alliance, and I am a 7-time blood clot survivor.
And we're here to stop the clot. It's difficult to illustrate just how indiscriminate a clotting event could be. They strike, and suddenly you are forever changed. Our guest today is no stranger to the unexpected reality of a clotting experience. From being the founder and CEO of Walk Swiftly Productions to her legendary career with ESPN and CBS as a sports journalist, our guest is someone whose ambition knows no bounds. Please join me in welcoming the impeccable and incomparable Bonnie Bernstein.
My name is Bonnie Bernstein. I am the founder and CEO of Walk Swiftly Productions. Entrepreneurship is my 2.0, if you will, after nearly 2 decades on air covering all of the world's biggest events for ESPN and CBS. And I am also a blood clot survivor. I was diagnosed with DVT and a bilateral pulmonary embolism back in 2006. I was 36 years old. And when I talk about my diagnosis, one of the first questions I always get is, you can get blood clots that young? And that was exactly what I thought when I was initially diagnosed. I was just heading back to ESPN after 8 years at CBS, and I was running a pretty frenetic schedule. I was doing the #1 college football game broadcast on ABC on Saturday, hopping on a plane, and then going to be the dugout reporter for Sunday Night Baseball on ESPN. To me, 36 is pretty young. You don't really think about how taking 4 flights a week might affect your physical health. And so it wasn't even something on my radar. That October, I had been experiencing some pain in the upper part of my left groin. A few months before that, on and off, I'd been getting this random pain in my calf, but it went away. And so as somebody who is a lifelong athlete, I did gymnastics all the way up through college, there's kind of a process when you're feeling pain. You stretch, you ice, you might take some ibuprofen, but you just anticipate with time that it's going to go away. The groin pain did not go away after 2 to 3 weeks. And I was on the sideline of the Texas-Oklahoma Red River rivalry, one of the biggest rivalries in all of college football. And not only was my thigh throbbing, but my entire leg was throbbing, and I was starting to have trouble breathing. And that was something that was new. You're covering the game, though. There's no time to worry about pain. There's no time to think about, oh gosh, is there something actually wrong with me? But when the game was over, the entire broadcast crew and the producer and the director scrambled to get to their cars. There's a police escort waiting for us to take us to the airport. The Red River rivalry is held at the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and you have to navigate getting out of the stadium through the Texas State Fair. It's probably close to a mile from the time you leave the stadium to actually getting to the car. By the time I got to the car, I was having so much trouble breathing. That's when the light bulb went off for the first time that something very serious might be wrong. I didn't know what it was. I had no knowledge about blood clots. And so I get on a plane to fly from Dallas back to New York. A couple of days later, I went to a physical therapist and I explained all of this pain and the difficulty breathing and the dull pain in my chest. And he initially worked on my leg. The next day I called him back because not only was there pain, but there was redness and swelling both behind my knee and in front of my knee. And he said, okay, we'll keep it elevated. Let me just think about this and call you back. He calls me back a couple hours later and he says, get to the hospital. I was thinking about it. If you're experiencing pain and swelling and redness, there might be an issue with circulation and it could be a blood clot.
Dr. Davis, telephone please. Dr. Davis, telephone please.
So I go to one of the area hospitals in New York City, and if you've ever gotten a test done, you know that the techs administering the test are very stone-faced. You can look at them to try to get some sort of sense for if something's wrong, and they are trained to not give you any information from their facial expressions. But they're doing a venal Doppler ultrasound. You know, it's like when you're pregnant, they wave the wand, they put the gel and they put the wand over you. And as the tech doing the test was working through different areas and pressing down, I was looking on the monitor, and at one point she pressed down and her eyes got really big. And she didn't say anything, but after the test, she said, we need to get you across the street to get a CT scan. I'm starting to get scared. I'm thinking this is a groin pull. It's clearly more than a groin pull, but I'm not getting the information. Go across the street to radiology, get the CT scan, and before I know it, a pulmonologist walks into my room. He throws up 2 films, one of each my right and my left lung. He tells me that I've got a blood clot the full length of my left leg from my Achilles all the way up to my groin. And he says, these are your 2 lungs. You see all these black dots on your lungs? I said, yes. He said, those are blood clots. And he explained to me that I had a DVT in my left leg. The clot had broken off, gotten into both of my lungs, infiltrated them. And he looked me dead in the face and he says, I have no idea how you're still alive. The only thing I can think of is that you are in extraordinary shape, but we need to admit you right away and get you hooked up to a drip so we can start handling these blood clots. I was admitted to the hospital. You're hooked up to things. They're giving you medication, but there's also a decent chunk of time where you're alone. I started researching DVT and pulmonary embolism, and I started reading that blood clots do not discriminate. They can happen to somebody at any age, any race, any religion, any ethnicity, and started learning about all of the different symptoms and risk factors. And it was just so eye-opening. But I remember thinking, if I get through this, and I felt horrible, if I get through this, the first thing that I was going to do was become a patient advocate, because the more I researched, the more I learned that if you have an awareness about the signs and the symptoms and the risk factors, DVT is by and large preventable. And so from that day in 2006 to today, I take a lot of pride in the fact that particularly around March, which is DVT Awareness Month, I'm putting out these messages on social media just to share a little bit about my story with the hopes that it'll send off a signal to somebody and we can save a few lives. I think a lot about how being diagnosed with a life-threatening condition has impacted my life. Had it never happened, I would still say that resilience and intestinal fortitude are my life calling cards, if you will. And that probably comes from being a lifelong athlete, blowing out my knee 4 times, coming back each time. But there's just a different perspective I think you get when you are lying in a hospital bed and you're having a doctor say, I'm not sure how you're still alive, but there's a reason you are. So the resilience piece, I think, is very much there. Where I feel it's most impacted me is my sense of purpose. You know, a lot of times when you're fortunate enough to rise up the corporate ladder, be successful in whatever it is that you're doing in your career, you're just kind of moving along in your day. And at some point it hits you. Is what you're doing for a living feeding your purpose? And for as much as I loved and I've appreciated every single opportunity I've had covering amazing events and working with incredible people at places like ESPN and CBS, and now being on this entrepreneurship journey and having my own production company, there have been times at the highest of the highs of my career, I still found myself wondering what my purpose was. Being given a second opportunity, being a blood clot survivor, it gives me such profound purpose because we know if we can educate as many people as possible, we're saving lives because DVT is by and large preventable. And so I think as we all get older, it's kind of natural to think about what are we putting our energy into, being more mindful about what truly makes our heart happy. And again, just focusing on the purpose. And I truly believe that when the most dire of circumstances occur, a lot of times you can't control that, but what you can control is how you respond and how you live moving forward. And because I was given a second chance, I've just made the conscious choice to learn as much as I can and to share everything I can about blood clots with anybody who's willing to listen.
For some, it is an unfortunate reality that ambition and physical well-being both demand focused intent and time. How do you balance time away with the creative drive to maintain momentum in your professional world? Sometimes all it takes is finding the right balance and heeding precautions of your medical providers. Here to discuss tips on safe long-distance travel while living with a clotting disorder is Dr. Elliot Hout.
Travel is a known risk factor for developing blood clots. So anybody in long-distance travel is going to be at higher risk. They've even been called, economy class syndrome. You're stuck in a plane, you're in the back, your legs are all bent up, you can't get up and move around. You stay still for a long time. That puts people at higher risk for getting blood clots, specifically, deep vein thrombosis and pulmonary embolism. So there's questions of what should you do in those cases to help try to prevent that. So for the average person, we don't recommend usually any medications, but you can wear compression stockings. I personally wear compression stockings when I fly cross country. There's really no downside to them, and it's potentially beneficial. I've seen the back of the airplane magazines that tell us what we should do to prevent blood clots. I don't know that there's any great data on these things like, doing your leg exercises and getting up and moving around and drinking extra water. I don't know that there's a lot of data on those things. None of those things are really going to hurt you, but I don't know that I can give you scientific proof that they're going to be of some benefit. There are some patients that might be at high enough risk that medications might help prevent a blood clot. It might be something as simple as taking aspirin. It might be some other medications we use for prevention of blood clots in high-risk patients. I wouldn't say there's a lot of strong evidence for those medications for the average person, but especially in patients who've had a blood clot before or are at very high risk due to genetic dispositions that they have, they might benefit from those medications. So that's where I'd say in those specific cases, touch base with your doctor, see if there's any specific recommendations.
I don't know if you probably have. There's a bill that's pending in Congress now, the
Oh,
menopause bill, and
okay.
Halle Berry is their champion slash spokesperson. You
I think
probably
I
saw it.
did, yeah. But I didn't know it was attached to like a bill on the Hill or anything. Oh, that's
So
interesting.
there's an actual bill, and I think there's like 17 women senators that are now supporting this bill.
Oh, that's also.
Yeah, and so I was in DC recently, and we met with some of the offices, some of the staffers in the offices, and I was like, "Hey, you have this bill. This is great. Like again, like what you're saying, destigmatize this. Like let's just talk about this, right? Like this is
Yeah.
called life." And I was like, "But there's no mention of blood clots anywhere in this bill, and it needs to be included because women on hormonal replacement therapy,
Yes.
there are options like that needs to be part of the conversation as well." So it's awesome that they're talking about it. It's being destigmatized.
Yeah.
But we still need to include blood clots in that conversation.
I've actually done a little bit of advocacy work for the President's Council on Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition, and I am astounded by things that wind up in bills that have absolutely nothing to do with the bill. I'm like, what? Yeah. So anyway, I'm happy to help if you need some support on the advocacy front. I think one of the biggest challenges has been, there are things like you think about breast cancer, and there's over the course of time, there's just a level of awareness, the pink ribbon. Like I remember we would always talk about when we had the coalition, blood clots are just not sexy,
Yes.
but I do feel, and especially the hook might be just because it's such a hot thing, is the peri and menopause conversation, because everybody's talking about it right now. And it's actually cool to talk about because of this whole destigmatization process. And it's certainly not to minimize all of the other aspects of it. But I'm kind of wondering, just in terms of strategy, if there's a way to sort of, hang on the coattail of the conversation currently going on. So
Absolutely. I mean, my feeling is like whatever we can use to raise awareness, let's do it. And if it gets us through the door, that's half the battle. So your story, oh my God, it's
it's a little
just,
nutty.
it's crazy. It's just crazy.
Yeah.
You're so lucky.
But yeah,
You're so lucky.
you don't realize it in the moment because I was in pain, but I never thought, oh my gosh, like I might die tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's just, I think one of the biggest challenges is the psychosomatic piece, because physically you may be healed. So the blood clots, fortunately, have completely dissipated from my lungs, but I still have remnants of it in my leg. And so I'm constantly worried because we know that it dries up and attaches to the vein wall about circulation. So anytime I am feeling a dull pain or something's bugging me for a few days, it immediately goes into my head that, oh my gosh, the blood clots are back. And people don't realize that psychosomatic piece is something that you are stuck with for the rest of your life. And you have to learn to be okay with it, which is not fun, but really try to trust your gut. And if you feel like something's wrong, go to the doctor.
Go to the doctor. So you answered my question before I even had a chance to ask it. So thank you for that. You're like psycho.
Sure.
You can figure out what I'm thinking.
Yes.
And I know you've actually done a deep dive on, like athletes and mental health and
For sure.
how you do. You're an athlete. How does everybody deal with the mental health aspect? But there's a mental health aspect to this blood clot journey as well.
Yeah.
And, the majority of people who have experienced a blood clot that come to the National Blood Clot Alliance, like 97% of them actually still suffer from PTSD related to their blood clot experience.
I think there's a valuable lesson in the notion that our ability to cope post-diagnosis from a mental health standpoint can be directly impacted by our physical health. So if we're proactive about eating healthy, staying hydrated, doing the cardiovascular exercise, even just getting in 10,000 steps a day, being very mindful, if you have a series of meetings, which are the meetings are the ones that I can get out from behind my computer and take a walking meeting? Because if you're proactive from a physical standpoint, the chances are that you're not going to feel any sort of pain that will send off those PTSD signals. So the longer I've distanced myself from the actual diagnosis, the stronger I feel about there being this direct correlation between how much attention we pay to our physical health and how that impacts our mental attitudes toward being a survivor.
No, I think that's really well said. And I think, you've said what so many feel when they come to us. The other thing that I wanted to talk to you about is we have so many women that come to us that have been dismissed, and gaslighting is a very real thing that they have experienced.
Yeah.
And so as someone who's gone through this process, if you're talking to somebody new, if you're talking to a woman who's recently diagnosed and they don't feel as though they're being listened to, or even somebody who hasn't been diagnosed yet, but they don't feel like they're being listened to, what do you say to them? What do you tell them?
I'm going to answer this question differently today than I would have 10 years ago. And I think it has something to do with personal evolution or just having less energy as we get older. If you would have asked me that question 10 years ago, I probably would have responded with more anger or frustration because societally we have seen this pattern year after year where women don't feel heard. And it's completely understandable that when you've been dealing with that, you want to clap back and be like, why aren't you hearing me? We're no different. It doesn't matter gender, race, religion, ethnicity. We are all human beings on this earth and we only get one shot at life. So I think part of my energy in answering your question a while ago would have been like one more of anger and defiance. These days, I would say that if you don't understand why people react the way they do, try to find a way to show compassion because everybody comes at life and sees things through the lens of what their own personal experience and environments give them. It's never anything personal if you don't feel heard. It's just that the person from whom you don't feel heard doesn't have the ability to hear you. You can't control that. But what you can control if you don't feel heard is how you go about finding solutions that suit your needs. More than ever, we have more information at our fingertips that can empower us to find the solutions that are best for us. There are communities everywhere on social, from Facebook to Instagram, every single social platform. There's a community for us to lean into. There is the Alliance that provides so many resources, human beings you can speak with, all sorts of stories that will help you understand that you're not alone. And part of finding the solution, quite frankly, is just having the peace of knowing you're not alone. Because when it happens to you, so many people would probably react the way I did, which was, how can this happen to me? I am young. I am healthy. I assumed, like many people, that blood clots are something that only afflict the elderly. I had all of these misconceptions, and it's natural to feel when you're just in the thick of something that is extraordinarily frightening that you're alone. The reality is you are never alone. And so whether it's community groups online or alliances or doing your own research, all of these things empower you to feel heard, even when you don't feel heard.
I love that response. And I think that's where we're gonna end it there because I don't see it getting any better than what you just said. Bonnie, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us today on Taking a Breath. This was an amazing episode. Maybe one of my favorite. I'm not sure I'm supposed to say that, but it was really incredible.
They're all your favorite, Leslie.
I know this was incredible. It really was incredible, and you just framed it so eloquently. And we don't want to lose you. We appreciate you being on today, but we really want to. You brought up the word community, and we want you in that community because your story, your voice will save lives. And that's our end game here, is to make sure not just to help treat people, but to prevent getting them to begin with.
Absolutely. Leslie, I just think it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything that the Alliance does. We need places where people can go if they have questions, if they want to do a risk assessment test, where there are resources and stories where they can be educated and find comfort and peace and information. So it's my pleasure to be here, but I'm equally as grateful for everything that you do.
Thank you. We want to thank Bonnie one more time for being here today and sharing her journey as a blood clot survivor. A special thank you to the always informative Dr. Elliot Hout from Johns Hopkins for his expertise. And thank you for joining us here today on another episode of Taking a Breath. For more information on risk, prevention, and community, please visit stoptheclot.org.
We know the patient because we are the patient. Together with listeners like you, we can collectively stop the clot.
Another Everything Podcast production. Visit everythingpodcast.com, a division of Pattison Media. Subscribe wherever you get your podcast.